All right. Okay. And then we will move on to blacking out to contest. Now, the main idea of engaging with blackout poetry is to see how we currently make sense of decolonization and coloniality can be changed, whether it should be changed, our understanding should be changed, or if they should be changed, why, right? So you will individually start doing blackout poetry, and we have sent a couple of texts. If you want to use them, you can, or else whatever you have at the moment, maybe a old page or an old newspaper, you can use whatever you want, you like. And once you have individually done your blackout poetry, you can share your poems in breakout rooms. So that will be around 15 minutes. You will discuss why you did that poem, how it is related to coloniality or decolonization. And then we will we will come back to the main room and discuss around 10 minutes the poems. Like, for example, within each, I would suggest that within each breakout rooms, it will be really important that if you can have, invite a volunteer to lead the discussion. And then select whatever you think is more relevant, more suitable, interesting to share it once you are in the main room. And then one or two people from each team, breakout group, can discuss, share selected one or two poems with the whole group. And then I will wrap up. I will take around 5 minutes to wrap up. So this is how the session will go today. And this discussion will start with a kind of, I have already discussed about coloniality within our institution. So from there, I would like to remind yourselves that we were discussing about 3 dimensions. There are so many dimensions of coloniality, but we discussed mainly epistemic, systemic, and affective. These are the 3, as I find, 3 main dimensions of coloniality. Now, I will kind of discuss these 3 dimensions in a different way to how I discussed them in the previous session. Now, when we are talking about coloniality in knowing, it is really important within higher education in the UK, in Australia, Canada. We are talking about epistemic coloniality. Now, what does it mean? Whenever we start talking about decolonization, we all have this experience. Our students, our staff members, they want one big thing, one particular thing. That is decolonizing the reference list, the reading list. The students need authors from different other countries, global south, low-income countries, or non-white authors. So I think that is the most common idea, but I'm kind of contesting, problematizing the existing realities, existing assumptions about epistemic coloniality. What I understand through my reading, through my discussions, and my involvement in decolonization so far, I have understood that this idea about epistemic decolonization or epistemic coloniality exist because of this word called reality. Our connections as human beings, our connections to the idea of reality, the idea of world. As academics, as students in higher education, what we are actually doing, regardless of the discipline in which we are in, right? What we are doing is trying to understand the world and the people and the things in the world. So what, on the one hand, we have an understanding about world as it is. And on the other hand, when we come to the higher education, institutionalized worlds, we try to understand world as it can be known. Now, there are big words. Epistemology is how to know the world. Ontology is how we look at the world, how we perceive the world. So when we are thinking about these 2 aspects, world as it is, world as it can be known, these are 2 dichotomies. That is how higher education normally presents these 2 realities. So when we talk about world as it is full of beliefs, faith, imagination, fantasy, fabrication. But on the other hand, when we think about world as it can be known through research, through publications, through institutions, it is the knowledge, the truth. the scientific truth that can be accepted. So this dichotomous way of thinking about the world is actually the stem, the main root of coloniality in knowing, epistemic coloniality. And there are so many complexities. Now, for example, we have scientific knowledge and unscientific or humanities related social scientific knowledge. However, they are actually interrelated. They are all related to each other. Because very simple, let me give you a very simple example. We call some people within institutions scientists, and some people we call, they are not scientists, they are actually doing social sciences. But when you go home after work, you do not act as a scientist or a social scientist at home. You will act as a mother, as a wife, as a neighbor, whatever. Right? So we are all interrelated. Our roles are quite temporary. The truths we think about are quite temporary as well. So when we are talking about epistemic coloniality, we need to question. People are asking, our students are asking, our staff members are asking, okay, we need global north, we need non-white authors. Certain knowledges have been neglected. Yes, of course, that is the case. It happens because of this dichotomous way of thinking. This root cause should be addressed if we are going to address coloniality in epistemology. Like, for example, I don't know whether you are familiar with Capra. Capra beautifully writes about how physics and Taoism connects. And Gabor Mate, he's a doctor, and he very beautifully talks about how this interrelationality is not recognized within the society and how that can lead to mental health issues, creating a toxic culture. So you can understand we have to think about decolonization in very different ways, because if we go to the roots lie somewhere else, not in the reference lists, not in the people, not in the colors. And now moving towards continuation of the colonial affinities. This is related to affective coloniality. Now, when we are talking about affective coloniality, it is about how we think as people, how we feel, what values we want to uphold, right? How do we conceptualize world? And how do we position ourselves in the world? Now, this is really interesting because when you're talking about our affinities with the world, with the people, with things, with institutions, how we try to position ourselves either as a brown woman, Indian woman, Sri Lankan woman, white woman, whatever, as a higher education teacher. Now, what are we trying to do? We are trying to classify. Our society is full of classifications. Sometimes we need classification, but when you're talking about coloniality, there is a particular history to that. Very clearly, Frantz Fanon he's a Black writer who has written a lot about Black enlightenment, Black freedom in a different sense. Actually, he warned people, if you kind of go behind this terminologies, the discourse created by the colonizer, like race, identities, these are colonizers' creations. If you go behind them, kind of affiliate yourself with them in an intimate manner, there will be problems. You are recolonizing yourself. And another writer who writes about this beautifully is Paul Gilroy. He's also a Black writer. He also says, don't highlight the identities and the races that we are not born with. These have been created by the colonizer to colonize us. And don't continue the affinities that destroy or that create us problems. By creating these variations, creating these differences, what the colonizer wanted was actually to divide and rule, and it was quite successful. Now, for example, I use the term now instead of systematic, actually it is methodological coloniality, and very good example comes from India. India has been colonized over 200 years by British colonizers. What Britain did here was really interesting in a negative way. Now, before 1947, just before 1947, when they were given independence, what Britain did was they just did not leave countries. They emptied the countries, plus they made some link so that they can continue colonizing. So what they did was they offered a voting system. They suggested actually a voting system which is based on faith. So there were Muslims, there were Sikh people, Hindu people, and there were little problems among these people. And I call them narcissism in small differences. We have in family siblings fight, something like that. They exploited these little differences by giving them a particular voting system, faith-based voting system. And still today, the country is enjoying the repercussions. But the thing is that colonizer is not directly responsible. They only suggested. And the people got into the trap. And that is how coloniality continues, and that is how coloniality is initiated. And we need to understand this if we want to do anything with decolonization or coloniality. And moving on, and very recently I coined this term sustainable coloniality, because I understand that even though geographically they have left us, they have left the colonies, they have not left the colonized, the system, because they are still colonizing. When everything has been taken away, we are still dependent on the colonizer. So that is the colonial dependency. And the colonizer is now, previously he was the colonizer, now the colonizer is the savior through international aid, through supporting in our civil wars, right? In so many different ways, providing political guidance, they still keep helping the colonized. And it's very interesting to know that the terms like Commonwealth, now even in my country is a Commonwealth country. And if you think about critically the term Commonwealth, wealth belongs to the individual countries, but it became common because the Britain or the colonizer, whatever the country is, the colonizer exploited, extracted everything. And now someone else's wealth has become someone else's wealth, and it is commonwealth, right? So this is how the sustainable coloniality happens. The dependency continues. And now when the dependency continues, what happens is the coloniality in the absence of a colonizer happens. So there are no colonizers in most of the colonies now. But coloniality is there. Colonial values are there. Colonial education systems are there. Right? So that is the sustainability of coloniality. And it is very strategic, and still it is successful in most of the countries. Now the question today is, if this is the case of coloniality, if it is sustainable, if it is really difficult to get rid of because we ourselves are kind of intimately embracing the values, the races, the identities we have been enforced by the colonizer, how can we decolonize ourselves? How can we decolonize our thinking? So my suggestions are very simple, but very complex as well. So first, we need to resist the myths we live. We always live bifurcated realities. We highlight self and the other. And in certain higher education agendas, we know there is a discourse, self, or don't other. Please don't other the other, right? So other is either sacredly treated or completely neglected. And we have been given fixated identities. I have a brown identity, someone else has a white identity, someone else has something else. So we are kind of created as people in the past tense. We have happened long time ago. We have had fixed identities, fixed cultures, fixed realities. Even though we live today, we are beings in the past. So we have to question these things. Why are we still valorizing things that we should not? That things that we were destroyed, that it used to destroy us. And then questioning the reality. The idea of reality, especially in higher education, we think if you write objective, still I have students asking, Thushari, can I use I when I write? Can I be subjective? Because if it looks like a sin if you write using first person, right? So the thing is, reality is neither objective nor subjective. My only argument is we never perceive reality in real life. Reality is what we perceive reality. We perceive things by in the way we interpret our lives, in the way we have learned about life, right? The context in which we have lived, so many factors help the perception of our realities. And the other thing is, everything is becoming something else. I am Thushari now. Within the next second, I am Thushari A, B, C, D, or something else. That is how reality is. It just slips away before we capture. Reality cannot be captured. And then we have been talking about decolonization for some time now. Almost nothing has happened. Why? Because of this are our colonial ways of thinking. So we need to take action. So as Hannah Arendt very clearly mentions, acting means to seize an initiative and do the unanticipated. But within systems, it's really difficult to do anything unanticipated because everything is structured. Thinking differently is important. Now, in the Western societies, we always, teach in a nuanced manner to students. Individual is the most important, right? You must learn to get a job. You must go here and there, and in the world, you must. It is you, I all the time. This is individual. But actually, in real life, there is no one called individual. There's nothing called individual. We are individual selves. Individual means we can be splitted. We think about myself, I, but actually there's nothing like that. For example, even our deepest emotions are not our own. They are shaped by the context in which we live, the people we come into contact, the places we occupy. Very simply, I am because of you. So, for example, I'm a teacher because of my students, my institution, my colleagues. So the idea of individuality is a creation. So the self is just a kind of unrelated temporary experiences, series of experiences. We can't touch, nobody has seen the self. But still in colonization, decolonization, we are highlighting self and the other. Then it is very easy to divide and disregard. Divide and destroy. So, because there are two things, self and other. But my argument is that we all belong to one race, that is human race. When we understand that, we can at least begin to think about how to love across the lines of difference, how to think in terms of new values, new ways of thinking, create new identities. We never live one identity. We are multiple people, multiple individuals. Right? So this is really important. We need to think about in different ways. That is why I'm using this particular quote here. I'm sure at least some of you may have heard about Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian writer. She won Booker Prize in 1997 for her wonderful book. And now I'm quoting the first chapter of her book. Now she's referring to the narrators. One of the narrators' family has a pickle factory. So she's talking about the pickle factory. She says they used to make pickles, jams, curry powders. The Food Products Agency banned it because according to their specifications, it was neither jam nor jelly. Too thin for jelly and too thick for jam. an ambiguous, unclassifiable consistency. They said, they means the food product agency. And then in the next page, she explains, it was time when unthinkable became thinkable and the impossible really happened. Now, these quotations come in her wonderful book, The God of Small Things. Now, here what is important is, actually, she really depicts the human nature. We are neither jelly nor jam. We are too thick for jam, too thin for jelly. That is how we are. That is who we are. That is what we are. So when we are talking about the whiteness, when we are talking about the others, when we are talking about fixated identities, they are all just nothing. Right? When we understand this, that we are a pickle of this and that. We don't belong anywhere. There are places, we have visas, passports, there are political aspects of our life. But when we think about coloniality, we are intimately embracing all these political, colonial, systemic, unnecessary, clothings. And they create us enormous problems. We go to war, we kill each other, we hate each other, we are in competition. Why? Because of this bifurcated understanding of the world. So my invitation to you today is think about decoloniality in a different way. Try to get rid of the things that have been created to destroy us. Decolonization is not about the colonized people. It is about everybody. We are all being colonized in one way or the other within institutions, within the society, within the rules what that have been created by us. So it is really important as a collective society, we think about coloniality and decolonization. Now, why am I using blackout poetry? I think I will show you some examples of blackout poetry as well. Blackout poetry is actually where it's a very simple art form. You just make use of a text which is already done and then black out certain words, phrases, whatever, to create new meaning out of that. Now, here we are thinking about decolonization and coloniality. Think about any theme like uncertainty, race, myth of race, actually, myth of identity, whatever. The things that we discussed just now, or create your own theme and think about one particular theme. Take out your, after this session, you can start take your black pen and just black out certain words that you think are not relevant in that text. And the words, phrases, full stops, commas that you have left without blacking, that they will create a wonderful poem that is related, that talks about coloniality. That is what we are expecting you to do. Now, I use blackout poetry because it helps us disrupt the current understanding. So already there's a text, we change the text. By changing the text, we change the meaning, right? It reminds us of our relationality to others and other things. Nothing is existing on its own. So all the creations we do are based on someone else's creation. Even though we use the word innovation, innovations come from someone else's innovation. Isn't that the way things happen? Even though all the time we try to claim things, we can't actually, because someone else already has done it. Someone else already has thought about it, right? So, and also blackout poetry provides a simple approach to create complex meanings. And it allows us to meander between fact and fiction and to imagine. So these are the reasons why I used blackout poetry in this session. So these are some examples. They were not created by me. I have got them from the web. You can see how some people have done blackouts. So the second one, you can see most of the lines have been blacked out. And the one with the blue and black, they have created some shapes. Okay, so this is what I would like you to do. Now, let me look at the time. 6:09. So if you can take about 20 minutes, now it is 6, let's say 6:10. If you take about 20 minutes individually, use your black pens, whatever text you have. You can also use the text Sarah has sent. So we have sent 1-page a text for you to use if you want, right? So take about 20 minutes. You can switch off your camera and the mic and go out and do the blackout and come back after 20
just
minutes.
make sure you come back. Don't
Yes,
disappear, because this is the
that
fun
is
bit.
really important. Yeah. And then we will put you into breakout groups. You can discuss your poems, and a voluntary leader will discuss them in the, select couple of suitable, appropriate poems, and they will be discussed in the whole group. And we'll finally wrap up thinking how your beautiful poems relate to coloniality and how they create new meanings of coloniality and decolonization.